Welcome to the second video of the Cybersecurity for Non-Techie Board Member video series. My name is Scott, and I'm with the Community Development Unit of the Government of Alberta. The goal of this video series is to introduce the concept of cybersecurity to board members and raise their awareness about the importance of organizational data and how they can reduce risks to that data. We realize that some of you may not be board members, and that's fine. But we want you to be aware that the information, concept, and ideas presented in this video series are from a board member perspective. It is important to note that this webinar focuses primarily on the governance aspects of cybersecurity for nonprofits, because we are governance geeks, not information technology experts. Therefore, the information presented in this series and the related materials are not intended to constitute professional or legal advice, the rendering of professional or legal concepts, consulting, or other professional services of any kind. We simply want to share with you information that we think will be helpful as you navigate your organization through its operations. We have a toolkit with links to other helpful resources related to cybersecurity that is in the description of this video. I also want to point out that these video recordings include some jargon related to the topic. So we developed a glossary that you can refer to during the recordings. The glossary is also in the description of the video. By the end of part 2 of this video series, you'll be able to recognize risks associated with operating in a digital environment and be able to explain the categories of cyber risk and how boards can assess those risks. In video 1, we looked at the definition of cybersecurity as well as a broad overview of what's the board's oversight role in cybersecurity. We also introduced the 3-step cyber risk oversight framework. In this video, we're going to examine step 1 of the cyber risk oversight framework in more detail. This step is learning where the cybersecurity risks and weaknesses are. This step could also be considered the risk assessment step in cybersecurity, because this is where you assess the cybersecurity risks of your organization. You cannot protect what you don't know you have. So this step is where you identify and create an inventory of the assets that you have to protect in your cyberspace. These assets could be business applications, data, hardware and software, and many other things. Some specific examples of these are online databases, your website, email, computers connected to the internet, mobile devices, online accounting applications, etc. You also need to consider what risks those assets may face and assess what consequences those risks could have for your organization if any of those risks happen. To identify where your cyber risks are, you need to first scan your entire organization. This means all its operations, programs, processes, individuals, etc. Then you need to identify what the weaknesses and risks are in terms of cybersecurity. It is important to highlight that this is the first step to learn where the cybersecurity risks and weaknesses are and how they may look different depending on the size and complexity of your organization. For example, if you are a small nonprofit with limited infrastructure, it might be sufficient for you to do an inventory of the data you are collecting, where you are storing it, and doing research into your business environment and the main cyber threats you face. That way, you may be able to make a good decision about where to invest in cybersecurity. However, if you are a bigger organization with more complex infrastructure that relies heavily on IT or data systems, you may want to invest in hiring a cybersecurity professional or service provider. Those professionals can conduct a formal threat and risk assessment and guide your security program. If you decide to go with this option, there are many credible cybersecurity experts and consultants available that you can contact. It is worth mentioning that whether you are a small nonprofit organization entirely run by volunteers or a larger one with paid staff, it can be a good idea to include relevant paid staff and volunteers in this step as well, because they can help identify potential cyber risks facing the organization. Also remember, the board needs to do this process on a regular basis. Now let's dive into how to do this assessment, and we'll start by looking at some broader categories of cyber risks that a nonprofit may face. There are 4 broad target areas that nonprofits may face cyber risks. The first category is financial resources. For example, if your nonprofit processes payments and donations online and keeps records of credit card numbers, etc., it would fall into this overall bucket. The second category is personal information. This category would include personal information that your nonprofit collects about your staff, volunteers, clients, or donors, for example. This personal information could include names, dates of birth, home addresses, bank account numbers, driver's licenses, medical, and other confidential information. A third category that could be targeted is organizational information. This could be things like business operations or program information, including business or operational strategies. Depending on your line of work, this might also include business documents that belong to your organization. The fourth category is technology environment. For example, there might be a small nonprofit whose staff or volunteers bring their own devices such as laptops or tablets to work for the organization. And this may represent an increased security risk to your nonprofit. Ensuring that all these categories are protected appropriately is an important part of the board's oversight role. Board members should have a high-level understanding of the information the nonprofit needs to collect in order to operate its programs and services, as well as the status of its overall technology environment. Now that we looked at some of the major cybersecurity risk categories, how can the board of a small nonprofit ensure that the information in cyberspace of the organization is protected? A common sense approach is to first think about what risk your organization is most likely to face, and then develop a plan to address them. This is called risk assessment. The first step to complete an inventory of the data that your nonprofit collects, ask yourself, what information does your organization collect and why? Where is that information stored? Who has access to it? And how sensitive is this information? List all the different types of data by location. For example, if you have a client management database, list everything that it collects and stores: home addresses, clients' date of birth and age, family status, medical information, etc. Then move on to your website and list everything that is stored there. Repeat this process for each location where your organization stores information, including any cloud-based storage if relevant. This will provide you with a comprehensive map of the data your organization collects. Once you've inventoried all your data, the next question is, how much do you care about it? In other words, what data is vital to your nonprofit's daily operations? Another way to think about it is, if this information is leaked or is compromised in some other way, what would be the impact on your stakeholders as well as your nonprofit's reputation? One useful approach is to divide up the data you've inventoried into different categories. I'm going to suggest 4 commonly used categories, but depending on the mission mandate of your nonprofit and your specific context, you may want to use some but not all of these categories, or even create some of your own. The first category is the data that is essential to collect and is also sensitive. The second one is data that is essential to collect but is non-sensitive. The third one is data that is non-essential but sensitive. And the last one is data that is non-essential and non-sensitive. Examples of data that are essential and sensitive could be files that have donor information or client files that have confidential or sensitive information, staff and volunteer personnel records, as well as credit card numbers and other personal data. These items will be your highest priorities. Examples of data that are essential and non-sensitive might include the brochures for a major project or program, or brand standards, or employee handbooks, or program policies and program manuals, etc. Next is data that are non-essential but sensitive. This might be information that you're asking for that you don't need and/or information that is no longer needed, but you still keep. For example, you used to run a program for which you collected and stored specific confidential client information. However, the program was canceled several years ago, but you're still keeping that information even though there's no good reason for that at this time. This represents a risk. If there is information like this that you're collecting or you're keeping from the past, there's strong rationale to stop doing it. Think about the cost versus the benefit of maintaining all of this data. You have to protect all the data that you are storing. If it was leaked, you will have failed to protect the sensitive information that you are collecting, and this could have a negative impact on your organization. Remember, if you are not collecting the information, you don't need to protect it, and you will reduce your costs. Reducing or limiting the data your nonprofit collects and streamlining the storage process, as well as destroying data in accordance with your nonprofit's documentation retention policy, could also be an easy first step to mitigate and reduce risk. The last category is data that are non-essential and non-sensitive. This might include information like old conference agendas in your website or old guidebooks on how to incorporate a nonprofit in Alberta from the corporate registry that is still on your hard drive, etc. This information can and should be deleted if it is non-essential and has no ongoing value to the organization. Now let's look at an example of a nonprofit board that has just completed an inventory process of the data the organization is collecting and storing. We'll also look at how the board divided up its information according to the categories we just covered. Here is a little context about the nonprofit for you. ABC Organization is a nonprofit located in Anytown, Alberta that works with vulnerable adults. ABC Organization collects and stores information in a variety of locations, including cloud-based database, donor management system, website, computer hard drive, and a Google Drive, which is also cloud-based. Now let's look at how the board of ABC Organization inventoried the data the organization is collecting and how they classified their data. ABC Organization board members worked with their executive director and listed all the information the nonprofit is collecting by location. They started with their client database. Note the ABC board used green sticky notes to denote information stored in the client database. As you can see, they identified that, in addition to client names, the organization is currently collecting client medical histories, client social insurance numbers, client home addresses, clients' dates of birth, and the total number of the organization's current clients. Of this data, the board members classified everything but the total number of their current clients into the category of essential sensitive. The board identified the information in this category as its highest priority to protect. Then the board looked at the organization's computer hard drive and used pink sticky notes to list the data stored there. As you can see, the ABC organization is storing its program manuals on the computer hard drive, which the board classified as essential non-sensitive. An old volunteer handbook from 10 years ago that has since been updated, and an old agenda from a conference it hosted 5 years ago, the board classified these documents as non-essential, non-sensitive. The social insurance numbers of its volunteers, which the board classified as non-essential, sensitive. Of this data, the board identified the program manuals as its highest priority to keep and protect. But the board decided that they could destroy the old volunteer handbook and old conference agenda in accordance with document retention policy, which also could free up some space on their hard drive. The board also decided to stop collecting the social insurance numbers of its volunteers immediately and to destroy the information they've already collected right away, because there was no reason to collect them and the risks associated with them was very high. I want to point out this is just a hypothetical example for the purposes of this cybersecurity series. Your organization may choose to classify some of this information differently, which is absolutely fine. The point is, though, that going through this type of exercise as a board could help you to identify what information your organization is collecting, where it is storing the data, how important the information is to your organization, and what some risks to the data might be. Now, once you've inventoried and sorted out the categories of your data and determined the various locations where you're storing it, the next step is to identify the risk your organization may face regarding the data. Ask yourself, what could happen to the data? How likely is that something would happen to it? What would be the impact if something did happen to it? In other words, how bad or serious would it be? Let's start with what could happen to the data. What could happen is about assessing your risks or imagining the various scenarios that would put your data at risk. We're just going to look at a few examples because the number of potential security risk scenarios are huge, but here are a few of the most common. The slide first shows examples of various risks from broader information security point of view. For example, physical theft or fire, a natural disaster such as a flood or earthquake, and improperly disposing of computer equipment without first removing the data, for example. Now, from a cybersecurity perspective, there are a number of potential risks. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but just some common examples. Phishing. Example, staff or volunteers are fooled into providing data to unauthorized persons. Insecure mobile devices, so that if the mobile devices are lost or stolen, anyone can view the data. Hacking into your network. Computer viruses or malware that attack your data. Ransomware, where you're locked into your database, for example, until you pay money. So let's continue on and look at the two other risk assessment questions. The first one is, what is the likelihood of something happening to the data is less straightforward. It depends on a number of factors, including the specific context of your nonprofit. For example, your mission and the type of work you do and the nature of the data you collect. However, the likelihood of any of the cybersecurity events from the last slide happening depends on the behaviors of the people working or volunteering for your nonprofit. For example, staff and volunteers who have not been trained to adopt an attitude of healthy skepticism towards links they receive in emails will significantly increase the risk of malwares on your devices. Some scenarios may depend on whether your organization is likely to be singled out as a potential target because of the nature of the work you do, the amount of media attention you receive, or simply because of the volume of financial transactions you are processing online, or even simply comes down to bad luck. The next question is, what would be the impact if something happened to the data? There may be consequences that are tangible and concrete, but there also might be consequences that are harder to measure. For example, if someone hacks your nonprofit's bank account and steals money from it, you can determine how much money you've lost and determine how it impacts your budget. However, there's also a consequence that is not easily measurable here. If the breach becomes public, it'll impact the reputation of your organization. For example, Stakeholders and members of the community may lose trust in your organization and choose not to donate anymore. Another example is if your donor management system is breached and the data from your donors are leaked, or your membership or newsletter subscription lists are leaked to the public. The information on your newsletter subscription list may not be very sensitive, but you still have failed to protect the information you are collecting, and it could hurt the reputation of your organization as a result. So let's look at a scenario from the ABC organization. The client database of the ABC organization, a nonprofit that works with vulnerable adults, is hacked. Staff are locked out of the database and the nonprofit receives a ransom demand from the hacker. Now, what are some of the potential consequences for ABC organization in this scenario? An example answer could be that staff can't get work done because they can't access client files. ABC organization clients could be at risk because their confidential information was hacked and staff cannot access their records anymore. The nonprofit could lose the trust of its clients, members, donors, general public, etc., and the organization may receive fewer donations in the future. The organization may experience legal problems, a loss of reputation, and additional financial losses. And, well, let's do a little deeper dive in some of the most important consequences of a data breach. In this scenario we just covered, the ABC organization is experiencing damage to information or information systems. Its systems could be offline and need repairs, replacement. Regulatory fines and penalties, legal fees. The nonprofit may be put under investigation, may be sued. It may need to pay for legal consultations or pay fines to individuals whose information was compromised. Drop in productivity. The nonprofit has to focus a lot of time and human resources to dealing with the breach, and that takes away time from its regular programs. Loss of information critical to operating the nonprofit. The nonprofit may lose its data or become locked out of its database. And damage to reputation or loss of trust. The breach may become public and the nonprofit may lose the trust of its clients, members, volunteers, and donors. As you can see, the consequences of a cybersecurity breach could be very severe for nonprofits. Therefore, it's very important for nonprofits to do an inventory of their assets and assess the risks to their assets. This brings us to the end of the second video in the cybersecurity video series. Thank you for watching. Our contact information is on the screen and is in your toolkit as well. If you are in Alberta and have a question, need further information, or would like to request our services, you can contact us by email or phone. You can also access our website to know more about our resources and services. Also, if you want to be notified of future services and resources, you can add your email address to our subscription form and you'll receive updates as they become available. The link to the subscription form is in the description of the video as well. Thank you for your attention. Take care, and always remember that our communities have so much more because of everything you do. Thank you, and bye for now.